The massive German Shepherd stood like a statue in the middle of the deserted highway, his silhouette cutting a sharp figure against the beams of approaching headlights. Between his jaws, wrapped in a soot-stained blanket, was a tiny human infant. Blood matted the dog's fur and burns marked his once proud coat, but his stance remained unwavering as the car barreled toward them. Sarah Collins slammed on her brakes, tires screeching against asphalt. Her heart hammered in her chest as the car skidded to a halt just feet from the animal. What in God's name? A dog with a baby in its mouth? On this remote stretch of highway at midnight? The dog's eyes, intelligent, desperate, pleading, locked with hers through the windshield. It didn't run. It didn't bark. It simply waited, as if it had been expecting her all along. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from. Now let's continue with the story. Max hadn't always been a stray. 4 years ago, he'd been the pride of the Mountain County Search and Rescue Team, with 20 successful finds to his name. His handler, Officer Jenkins, had called him the dog with a sixth sense for saving. That was before the avalanche incident where Max had led rescuers in the wrong direction. A family of 3 had perished. No one blamed Max. Sanimals could get confused in chaotic conditions, but the bad press made him undeployable. One night, someone left his kennel door open, perhaps as an act of mercy, perhaps to solve a problem. Either way, Max wandered for months before Rick Hayes found him digging through trash behind the quick stop. "Linda, got you an anniversary present," Rick had hollered that night, stumbling through the door of their dilapidated single-wide trailer reeking of cheap whiskey. The German Shepherd, then skinny and matted, cowered behind his legs. Linda Hayes had looked up from her cigarette, blonde hair hanging limp around a once pretty face now hardened by disappointment. "What the hell am I supposed to do with a mutt?" she'd snapped. But the dog stayed, another neglected soul in the Hayes household, where Rick's construction paychecks went straight to the liquor store and Linda's waitressing tips barely covered the bills. The dog became a silent witness to thrown bottles, screamed obscenities, and doors slammed so hard they rattled the windows of neighboring trailers. Sarah Collins was everything the Hayes couple wasn't. 32, disciplined, with a quiet dignity that came from surviving what should have broken her. 3 years ago, she'd had a different life. Married to David, mother to Lily, second-grade teacher with a house in the suburbs. Then came the rainy night, the drunk driver, the funeral with 2 caskets, one heartbreakingly small. Now she lived alone in a condo overlooking Ridgeview Lake, teaching at a different school where nobody knew her story. Her weekly drive to visit her parents' farm was her only regular outing besides work. She never took the highway at night anymore, except tonight when her father's sudden illness had called her home. The same night Max decided he couldn't wait any longer for anyone, to help. Max was born into a prestigious line of working German Shepherds at the Northland K9 Academy. From the moment he opened his eyes, he was destined for greatness. Unlike his litter mates, who occasionally shirked training for play, Max approached every task with unwavering focus. By 6 months, he could follow scent trails that adult dogs struggled with. By his first birthday, the academy director had personally selected him for specialized search and rescue training. "This dog's got something special," Trainer Wilson would tell visitors. "It's not just his nose or his strength. It's like he understands what's at stake." Max thrived under Officer Jenkins' handling. The tall, quiet man with salt and pepper hair never raised his voice, never needed to. A slight hand gesture, a soft whistle, and Max would execute complex maneuvers flawlessly. They became the unit's star team, dispatched to the most challenging cases: lost hikers in vast wilderness, children who had wandered from campgrounds, elderly dementia patients who had disappeared from care facilities. Their reputation grew with each successful find. Max's photo appeared in the local newspaper 5 times that first year. A framed picture of him wearing his official rescue vest hung in the sheriff's office. Children wrote him letters, which Officer Jenkins read aloud during their evening training sessions. 23 lives, Max," Jenkins would whisper on the ride home after a successful rescue. 23 people going home to their families because of you. Then came the Sullivan family case. An avalanche had struck without warning, burying a father and his 2 children during a backcountry ski trip. Conditions were treacherous, howling winds, temperatures dropping rapidly, a second storm approaching. Every second counted. Max had initially picked up a strong scent trail, leading rescuers east along a ridge. But halfway through, he'd suddenly changed direction, pulling Jenkins west toward a different section of the mountain. The team trusted Max and followed. Hours of frantic digging yielded nothing. When they finally returned to the original location, guided by a second rescue team, it was too late. The family had suffocated under the snow. No one officially blamed Max. The incident report cited unpredictable weather conditions affecting scent dispersion. But whispers started. Equipment went missing from Max's locker. Jenkins was reassigned to patrol duty, and Max was relegated to demonstrations and public relations events. A waste of his exceptional abilities. 3 months later, Jenkins found Max's kennel empty, the gate unlatched. The official report listed Max as escaped, but Jenkins recognized the deliberate nature of the unlatched gate. Someone had decided Max's career was over. Jenkins searched for weeks, but eventually had to accept the bitter truth. Max was gone, cast aside by the very system he had served with such distinction. How Max ended up with Rick and Hayes, their abusive household. Max survived his first month as a stray by hunting small game in the forest bordering Mountain County. His training made him resourceful, but he'd never learned to be truly wild. Winter approached, game became scarce. Hunger drove him toward town, toward the smells of human food and garbage. Pride kept him from begging. Instead, he became a shadow, emerging at night to scavenge behind restaurants and markets. At first, people reported a wolf lurking near the quick stop. Then someone recognized the distinctive shape of a German shepherd. Animal control set traps. Max avoided them all. His ribs began to show through his once glossy coat. His proud gait became a weary shuffle between hiding spots. It was behind the quick stop that Rick Hayes found him, paws deep in yesterday's discarded burgers. Rick had just cashed his paycheck and spent half of it on whiskey. He'd forgotten his wedding anniversary until the cashier had made a passing comment. Now he needed a gift, anything to avoid another night of Linda's bitter recriminations. "Hey, boy," Rick had slurred, approaching unsteadily. Normally, Max would have fled, but exhaustion and hunger had taken their toll. When Rick offered a half-eaten beef jerky stick, Max accepted it cautiously. When Rick patted his truck's passenger seat, Max hesitated only briefly before jumping in. The Hayes trailer sat at the back of the Pinewood mobile home community, its vinyl siding peeling, a blue tarp covering part of the roof. Inside, Linda Hayes had been drinking since noon, seething over another anniversary spent in this temporary trailer that had been their home for 7 years now. "Look what I brought," Rick had announced, flinging open the door and ushering in the filthy, malnourished dog. "Are you kidding me?" Linda had screamed. "We can barely feed ourselves." The argument that followed was typical for the Hayes household. Loud, vicious, and ultimately resolved when Rick stormed out to drink at the Rusty Nail until closing time. Linda had glared at Max, then tossed him a piece of bologna from her sandwich. "Don't get comfortable," she'd muttered. "You'll be gone tomorrow." But tomorrow came, and Rick insisted the dog stay. "He's a good dog. Probably worth something. Maybe we can breed him or something." Max stayed, adapting to his new reality. Food came irregularly. Sometimes table scraps, sometimes nothing for a day or more. Water from a cracked plastic bowl that was rarely refilled. When Rick was drunk and angry, which was often, Max became a convenient target for kicks and thrown bottles. When Linda was depressed, which was most days, Max would lie silently at her feet, occasionally receiving absent pats between her cigarettes. The neighbors complained about the dogs barking until Max learned to stay silent, even when hungry or in pain. The small yard became his territory during the day, a dirt patch enclosed by a chain-link fence. At night he slept on a threadbare blanket in the corner of the kitchen, alert to the sounds of breaking glass and shouting. Local kids called him the ghost dog because he would watch them silently from behind the fence, never barking, never wagging his tail. Parents told their children to stay away from the Hayes trailer and its strange, quiet dog. Linda's pregnancy and initial hope for change in the household. The pregnancy was unplanned, discovered when Linda was already 4 months along. She had attributed the missed periods to stress, the weight gain to depression. The doctor at the free clinic had been matter of fact. "You're having a baby in about 5 months, and you need to stop drinking immediately." That night, Linda sat on the porch steps, chain smoking and crying. Max had approached cautiously, resting his head on her knee. For once, she didn't push him away. "What am I going to do with a baby dog?" she'd whispered, her fingers absently finding the sweet spot behind his ears. "I can't even take care of myself." The pregnancy triggered something unexpected in the Hayes household. Hope. Rick stopped drinking for 2 whole weeks after hearing the news. He fixed a leaking roof, replaced a broken porch step, and even bought paint for the spare room. "It's going to be different now," he promised, hands on Linda's growing belly. "You'll see. This is our second chance." Linda wanted to believe him. She poured out the vodka bottles hidden around the trailer. She started taking prenatal vitamins. She even bought a second-hand parenting book and read it by flashlight when she couldn't sleep. Max sensed the change in atmosphere. Food appeared more regularly. The shouting decreased. Sometimes in the evening, all 3 of them would sit on the couch watching TV, almost like a normal family. Rick even started calling Max by his name, which he'd discovered on a worn tag buried under the matted fur on his neck. "Max," Rick had said, scratching the dog's chin. "Good, strong name. Probably a police dog or something before. See how he sits at attention?" For the first time since being abandoned, Max felt a tentative connection forming. His training had taught him to protect, to serve. Perhaps here, finally, was purpose again. Linda decorated the baby's room with yard sale finds, a crib missing 1 spindle, a mobile made of plastic birds, a changing table with chipped paint. She talked to her swollen belly, sharing dreams of parks and playgrounds and school plays. In those moments her face softened, years of disappointment temporarily erased. Max took to sleeping outside the nursery door, as if already standing guard over the child who hadn't yet arrived. Sometimes Linda would find him there and smile, a rare expression in the Hayes trailer. "You're going to be a good dog for the baby, aren't you?" she'd murmur, and Max would thump his tail in solemn agreement. The neighbors noticed the changes, too. Rick's truck was more often in the driveway than at the Rusty Nails parking lot. Linda started acknowledging waves and greetings when checking the mail. Someone from the church left a basket of baby items on their porch. For a brief, shining moment, it seemed the coming baby had worked a miracle on the trailer at the back of Pinewood Mobile Home Community. But miracles, especially in places like Pinewood, tended to be fragile things. 2 weeks before the due date, Rick lost his construction job. Budget cuts, he claimed, though Linda suspected his foreman had finally tired of his unreliability. That night, for the first time in months, the familiar smell of whiskey permeated the trailer. The sound of breaking glass followed, then shouting, then tears. Max retreated to his post outside the nursery, nose pressed against the doorframe, eyes alert in the darkness, as if already aware that his real job, his most important job, was about to begin. Turning point. Birth of baby Emma. Temporary improvement in household. The call came at 3 a.m, Linda's water breaking in a rush that soaked the mattress. For once, Rick was sober enough to drive, his hands shaking not from withdrawal but from genuine fear as he helped his groaning wife into the truck. Max watched from the window as the tail lights disappeared down the dirt road, wondering if this was how families usually began. Emma Hayes arrived after 14 hours of labor, 6 pounds 4 ounces of red-faced determination. The nurses at County General exchanged knowing glances when they saw Linda's track-marked arms. when Rick stepped out multiple times for fresh air that left him smelling of cheap bourbon. But when they placed Emma in Linda's arms, something shifted in the woman's tired face. A tenderness appeared, foreign yet instinctual. "She's perfect," Linda whispered, running a finger along Emma's tiny cheek. "Look at her, Rick. She's absolutely perfect." For a moment, Rick's usually hard expression softened. "She looks like you," he said, his voice catching. "Got your nose." When they brought Emma home 3 days later, Max was waiting. He'd barely eaten during their absence, refusing the dry kibble Mrs. Patterson from next door had poured in his bowl. He stood at attention as Rick carried the infant carrier into the trailer, his nose twitching with the new scent that would soon become the center of his world. "Easy, Max," Rick warned, lowering the carrier to the dog's eye level. "This is Emma. She lives here now." Max sniffed carefully at the bundle of pink blankets, at the tiny fist that had escaped its swaddling. His tail wagged once, slowly, a solemn acceptance of this new charge. The first month with Emma transformed the Hayes trailer. Linda stayed sober, setting alarms for feedings, learning to change diapers with increasing confidence. Rick worked odd jobs around the neighborhood, fixing Mrs. Patterson's fence, helping Mr. Gunderson with his leaky roof, bringing home honest money that went toward formula and diapers. The shouting matches decreased, replaced by hushed conversations about Emma's eating schedule and developmental milestones. Max observed this transformation with cautious optimism. His place in the household hierarchy shifted. He was no longer the easiest target for Rick's frustrations. Instead, he became Emma's unofficial guardian, lying beside her bassinet during naps, alerting Linda with a gentle nudge when Emma woke, crying. Visitors came. A social worker checking on reports from the hospital, church ladies with casseroles, even Officer Jenkins, who'd heard through the grapevine that his former partner had resurfaced. "Can't believe it's him," Jenkins had said, watching Max lying protectively near Emma's bouncer seat. "He was one of the best rescue dogs I've ever worked with." "No kidding," Rick had replied, momentarily proud to own such a distinguished animal. That night, Max received his first proper meal in months, hamburger mixed with kibble, served in a clean bowl. Linda hung a mobile over Emma's crib, colorful felt birds that spun in the breeze from the cracked window. She sang lullabies remembered from her own childhood, voice cracking but sincere. She made appointments with the pediatrician and kept them, dressing Emma in clean clothes and combing her wispy hair into tiny pigtails. For 6 shining weeks, the Hayes family functioned almost normally. Neighbors stopped crossing to the other side of the street when they saw Linda pushing Emma's second-hand stroller. Rick talked about getting his GED, about applying for a warehouse position that offered benefits. Linda mentioned community college, nursing assistant programs, a future beyond the trailer's thin walls. Max dared to relax his vigilance just slightly. Perhaps his new pack would survive after all. Return to alcoholism and neglect, Max's growing bond with baby Emma. The collapse happened gradually, then suddenly. First, Rick missed a day of work, claiming a migraine. Linda found the empty whiskey bottle under the porch steps but said nothing. Then came the argument about money. Too little coming in, too much going out for baby supplies. Voices rose, a plate shattered against the wall. Emma wailed in her crib, while Max pressed himself against her bedroom door, a furry barrier between the infant and the chaos. By Emma's 3rd month, the old patterns had reasserted themselves. Rick's sporadic employment became unemployment. The refrigerator held more beer than baby formula. Linda tried longer than she had before, fought against her cravings until her hands shook and cold sweat soaked her clothes. But one night, after Emma's colicky crying had lasted for hours, Linda reached for the bottle hidden beneath the bathroom sink. "Just to take the edge off," she whispered to herself, "just to get through tonight." One night became 2, became a week, became the new normal. Emma's feeding schedule grew erratic. Her cries went unanswered for hours. Clean diapers ran out. Linda improvised with cut-up towels until the next welfare check arrived. The pediatrician appointments were canceled, then forgotten entirely. Max watched this deterioration with growing alarm. His training had taught him to recognize danger, to assess situations rapidly and respond accordingly. This was not a sudden avalanche or a forest fire, but a slow-motion disaster unfolding day by day. And at its center was Emma, helpless, innocent Emma, whose cries increasingly went unanswered. So Max adapted. When Emma cried and no one came, he would nudge Linda awake. If Linda was too intoxicated to respond, he would stay with Emma, offering what comfort he could with his presence. He learned to detect the smell of a soiled diaper and would drag the diaper bag to Linda's feet, a pointed reminder. When Emma began to crawl, Max became her constant shadow, steering her away from broken glass and forgotten cigarettes. "That dog's obsessed with a baby," Rick complained one night, his words slurred. "It's creepy how he watches her." "At least someone's watching her," Linda had replied, immediately regretting her moment of clarity. The argument that followed left her with a bruised cheek and Rick storming out to the truck, engine roaring into the night. As Emma grew from infant to wobbling toddler, her bond with Max deepened. Her first word wasn't mama or dada, but a gurgling approximation of Max. She learned to pull herself up using his patient form, tiny hands gripping his fur while he stood perfectly still, a living support beam. When she managed her first unsteady steps across the living room, it was toward Max, who waited with what looked remarkably like pride in his intelligent eyes. Max became Emma's protector, playmate, and source of unconditional love. When Linda forgot meals, Max would push his own food bowl toward Emma, watching as she grabbed kibble with chubby fingers. He would carry her favorite stuffed rabbit to her when she cried, dropping it gently in her lap. At night, when the temperature dropped and the trailer's heating system failed again, Max would curl around Emma in her crib, his body heat keeping her warm through the cold hours until dawn. Max's nightly ritual of protecting Emma, their silent connection. By Emma's 8th month, Max had established a nightly ritual. After Rick and Linda tumbled into their alcohol-induced sleep, often passed out in front of the television or at the kitchen table, Max would perform a careful inspection of the trailer. He would nudge forgotten cigarettes off tables, push beer bottles away from edges, and check that the front door was secure. Then he would return to Emma's room, jumping carefully into her crib despite his aging joints, positioning himself so that she could nestle against his warm flank. These nights created a wordless bond between the abandoned dog and the neglected child. Emma would babble to Max in her secret baby language, tiny fingers tracing the scars on his muzzle from long-ago rescues. Max would listen with pricked ears, as attentive as if she were giving him vital mission instructions. Sometimes she would fall asleep with her head pillowed on his side, her breathing syncing with his in the quiet darkness. On the worst nights, when the arguments between Rick and Linda escalated to thrown objects and physical threats, Max would place himself bodily over Emma in her crib, a living shield. He never growled at his owners, never bared his teeth. His training ran too deep for that. But his eyes would follow them with a steady, judging gaze that sometimes penetrated even their alcohol-fogged minds. "That dog thinks he's better than us," Rick once muttered, swaying in Emma's doorway. He wasn't wrong. Max's canine brain might not have formed the thought in human terms, but he understood on a fundamental level that Emma deserved better than what her parents provided. In his previous life, he had searched for lost humans, bringing them back to safety and loving families. The irony wasn't lost on some deeper part of his consciousness. Here was a child who needed rescuing not from wilderness or disaster, but from the very people meant to protect her. Neighbors occasionally reported concerns to county services. A social worker visited 3 times over 6 months. Each time, Lyndon managed temporary sobriety, cleaning the trailer frantically before appointments. Rick would disappear, taking Max with him under the pretense of walking the dog, but really ensuring the animal couldn't somehow communicate the truth of their situation. Emma would be bathed, Dressed in her cleanest outfit, her thin face brightened with practiced smiles that she'd learned would please adults. "Everything seems to be improving," the social worker would note, fooled by the performance. "Just keep up with the parenting classes, Mrs. Hayes." But Max knew. Each night as he completed his inspection of the trailer, the overflowing ashtrays, the empty formula bottles, the sink stacked with unwashed dishes, he sensed a growing urgency. Emma was getting more mobile, more curious. The dangers were multiplying. Linda's periods of consciousness were shortening. Rick's temper was worsening. Something would have to change. In the quiet of those nights, with Emma's small hand curled trustingly in his fur, Max would stare out the window at the distant highway lights. His training surfaced in fragmented memories. Find the lost, lead them to safety, complete the mission, no matter the cost. But this mission had no clear parameters, no handler to guide him, no backup team waiting to assist. All he had was his own instinct, his own courage, and the absolute certainty that Emma's safety outweighed everything else, including his own life. The night of the fire, as he settled into the crib beside an already sleeping Emma, Max had no way of knowing that all his protective instincts, all his training, all his love for this tiny human would soon be put to the ultimate test. But some part of him had been preparing for this moment since the first time he'd laid eyes on her, since he'd first recognized her as his true purpose in this second chance at life. By early December, the Hayes trailer had deteriorated into a state that would have horrified even the most lenient social worker. The refrigerator held nothing but condiment packets, beer, and a carton of milk 3 weeks past its expiration date. Dirty laundry formed miniature mountain ranges across the living room floor. The bathroom sink had been clogged for so long that Linda had given up trying to fix it, using the kitchen sink for everything. Most concerning, the heating system had failed completely, leaving the trailer's interior barely warmer than the frigid air outside. Rick's unemployment checks had stopped, and what little money Linda earned from her sporadic shifts at the Waffle House disappeared into their shared addiction. Food stamps provided the bare minimum for Emma, but even those were sometimes traded for cash that never seemed to go toward bills or necessities. Max observed the deterioration with increasing anxiety. His own ribs had begun to show through his coat again as he routinely pushed his meager food portions toward Emma. At 8 months old, she had learned to feed herself clumsily, often dropping more than she consumed. Max would wait patiently, ensuring she took what she needed before licking up the remaining crumbs. The German Shepherd's once impressive physique had become gaunt, his powerful muscles wasting under the strain of malnutrition and constant vigilance. Yet his eyes remained alert, particularly when focused on Emma. He slept in snatches now, never more than 20 minutes at a time, his body perpetually tensed for the next crisis. One bitterly cold morning, after Rick and Linda had engaged in a particularly vicious argument that ended with Linda sporting a split lip and Rick storming out with the last $20, Max made a decision. He stood at the front door, scratching insistently, ears pricked forward in determination. "What's your problem?" Linda had muttered, opening the door while balancing Emma on one hip. "Go on, then." Instead of heading to his usual spot in the yard, Max looked back at them, then deliberately walked a few steps down the driveway before turning again, clearly wanting them to follow. "We're not going for a walk, you stupid dog," Linda had said, slamming the door. Max tried again that afternoon and again the following day, each time attempting to communicate something that Linda, in her distracted and diminished state, couldn't comprehend. If Officer Jenkins had been there, he would have recognized the behavior immediately. Max was trying to lead them to safety, away from what he perceived as danger. But there was no Officer Jenkins, no trained handler to interpret Max's increasingly desperate attempts at communication. There was only Linda, alternating between teary affection for Emma and vacant, glassy-eyed staring at the television, and Rick, whose presence in the trailer had become synonymous with tension and fear. Max began to contemplate more drastic measures. His training had taught him to adapt, to overcome obstacles in pursuit of his mission, and his mission, the one he had assigned himself, was clear: protect Emma at all costs. The question that troubled his canine mind in ways he couldn't articulate but deeply felt was whether protection now meant something more than simply standing guard, whether it meant removal from danger entirely. The moral complexity of such a decision would have challenged a human mind. For Max, it manifested as physical restlessness, as dreams where he carried Emma through forests and fields to some undefined safety, as hours spent staring at the highway visible from the trailer's small back window. Meanwhile, Emma was developing despite her circumstances. She had mastered crawling and was pulling herself up on furniture, her determined little face a mirror of Max's own tenacity. She babbled constantly now, a complex language that only Max seemed interested in hearing. Linda's interactions with her daughter had become mechanical, feeding, changing, occasionally bathing, but with decreasing emotional engagement. Rick barely acknowledged Emma's existence except to complain about her crying. Christmas came and went without celebration. New Year arrived with Rick and Linda passed out before midnight, empty bottles scattered around them like fallen soldiers. January brought snow that seeped through the trailer's poorly sealed windows and doors, creating miniature drifts on the interior sills. Max took to sleeping on top of Emma rather than beside her, his body heat the only reliable warmth in her world. It was during one of these bitter January nights, with wind howling around the trailer's metal exterior, that Max first smelled smoke. Not the usual cigarette smoke that permeated every surface, but something sharper, more dangerous. He'd lifted his head from Emma's crib, nostrils flaring. In the living room, Rick had fallen asleep with a lit cigarette. A small burn mark was already forming on the couch cushion beside his limp hand. Max had leapt from the crib and raced to the living room, barking sharply, a sound rarely heard in the Hayes trailer. The sudden noise had startled Rick awake, and he'd cursed, while extinguishing the smoldering cushion with his beer. "Damn dog," he'd muttered, but there had been a flash of understanding in his bloodshot eyes, a momentary acknowledgment of what might have. That near miss only intensified Max's vigilance. He began sleeping even less, his senses hyper-attuned to the sounds and smells of the trailer. Emma, perhaps sensing his anxiety, became fussier, clinging to him whenever he was within reach. The bond between them, forged in shared neglect and mutual dependence, grew stronger with each passing day. To Emma, Max wasn't just a dog, he was security, consistency, and love in a world where all three were in desperately short supply. February 15th began like most days in the Hayes trailer. Linda left for her waitressing shift at the Waffle House, leaving Emma in Rick's questionable care. Rick, already halfway through his first six-pack by noon, propped Emma in her high chair with some dry cereal and turned on a basketball game, immediately losing himself in the combination of alcohol and sports-induced adrenaline. Max settled on the floor beside Emma's high chair, catching the pieces of cereal she deliberately dropped for him while keeping one eye on Rick. When Emma began fussing, clearly uncomfortable in her soiled diaper, Max nudged Rick's leg repeatedly until he grudgingly attended to her. "You think you know everything, don't you?" Rick had muttered to the dog as he clumsily fastened a fresh diaper. "Regular furry nanny, that's what you are." The day dragged on. Linda returned from her shift smelling of grease and exhaustion. She and Rick immediately began arguing about money, the electricity bill was overdue again, and disconnection loomed. Emma, overwhelmed by the shouting, began to cry. The crying escalated the argument. The cycle continued, familiar and toxic. Dinner was a haphazard affair. Boxed macaroni and cheese for Emma, nothing for Max, and microwave burritos for the adults, washed down with beer for Rick and the cheap vodka Linda had hidden in the bathroom for herself. After Emma had been put to bed, the drinking continued. A neighbor stopped by with a bottle of whiskey, commiserating about the cold snap, about bills, about the general unfairness of life. Rick's mood improved with the free alcohol. Linda retreated to the bedroom with her vodka and a tattered paperback romance novel. By 11, the neighbor had left, and Rick was alone in the living room, cigarette dangling from his lips as he channel-surfed drunkenly. Max completed his nightly inspection routine before settling in Emma's crib, but his unease was palpable. Something about tonight felt different. The air too still, the quiet too complete. At midnight, Linda was already unconscious, the vodka bottle empty on the bedside table. In the living room, Rick's head had fallen back against the couch, eyes closed, breathing heavy. The cigarette, still lit, slipped from his fingers and landed on the shag carpet, beside an empty pizza box. Max, who had been dozing fitfully, was instantly alert. He smelled it before he saw it. The acrid scent of synthetic carpet fibers beginning to burn. He leapt from the crib, careful not to wake Emma, and raced to the living room. The cigarette had ignited a small flame, which was now spreading to the pizza box. Max barked sharply, but Rick didn't stir. The dog tried pawing at Rick's leg, even nipping at his hand. But years of alcohol abuse had rendered Rick's sleep nearly comatose. Max turned to Linda's bedroom, employing the same desperate tactics, but she merely groaned and rolled over. The fire was growing now, feeding on the cardboard and the cheap carpet. Smoke began to fill the small trailer, thick and toxic. Max knew the danger. His search and rescue training had included fire awareness. He knew how quickly a structure like this could become engulfed, how deadly the smoke could be before flames ever reached a victim. He raced back to Emma's room, where she still slept peacefully, unaware of the danger. Max hesitated for just one moment, torn between trying once more to wake her parents and the rapidly diminishing window for escape. The smoke was getting thicker. His training and instincts converged on one imperative: save the most vulnerable first. See Max's decision to save Emma, navigating through flames and smoke. Max made his decision with the clarity that had once made him an exceptional rescue dog. He would save Emma first, then return for her parents if possible. With gentle precision, he gripped the collar of her fleece pajamas between his teeth and lifted her from the crib. Emma stirred, but didn't wake fully, accustomed to Max's careful handling. The smoke was becoming dense now, forming a gray ceiling that descended lower with each passing minute. Max knew to stay close to the floor where the air remained clearer. He crouched low, balancing Emma's weight carefully, as he made his way toward the front door. In the living room, the fire had spread from the carpet to the couch. Rick remained unconscious, oblivious to the flames now licking at his pant leg. Max made a split-second calculation. He couldn't wake Rick without putting Emma down in the smoke, an unacceptable risk. The front door was blocked by growing flames. That left the back door, accessible through the kitchen. Navigating through the thickening smoke, Max carried Emma into the kitchen. The back door had a simple lever handle that Max had learned to operate months ago during his nighttime security checks. He placed Emma gently on the linoleum floor where the air was still relatively clear and jumped up to press the lever with his paw. The door swung open, letting in a blast of cold winter air that momentarily cleared the smoke around them. Max picked Emma up again and stepped outside into the biting February night. He didn't immediately flee the property. His training demanded that he get the victim to safety, then return for others. He carried Emma to the far corner of the yard, as far from the trailer as the chain-link fence would allow, and gently placed her on a relatively dry patch of ground. The cold would be a danger soon, but less immediate than the fire and smoke. Emma was fully awake now, confused and starting to cry. Max nuzzled her reassuringly before turning back toward the trailer, which was now visibly filled with smoke, orange flames visible through the windows. He raced back inside, staying low, making his way to Linda's bedroom first. The smoke was so thick now that Max could barely see, relying on memory and scent to navigate. He found Linda still in bed, unmoving despite the smoke. Max barked and pulled at her arm, even nipped at her shoulder hard enough to draw blood, but she remained unconscious, her breathing shallow. The heat was becoming unbearable, flames now spreading down the hallway toward the bedroom. Max made one last desperate attempt, gripping Linda's nightshirt and trying to drag her toward the door, but her dead weight was beyond his strength. The encroaching flames forced him back. Max raced to the living room, where conditions were even worse. The couch was fully engulfed, and Rick was nowhere visible through the smoke and flames. A loud crack overhead signaled structural damage. The roof was beginning to fail. Training warred with instinct, the drive to continue searching versus the certainty that no one could survive these conditions much longer, including himself. Burns were already forming on his paws from the hot floor, and his lungs labored to find oxygen in the smoke-filled air. The decision was agonizing but clear. Max turned and bolted back through the kitchen and out the rear door, where Emma still lay crying on the ground. In the distance he could hear sirens. A neighbor must have spotted the fire and called emergency services. But the trailer was isolated, the response time would be long, and the night was bitterly cold. Emma couldn't survive long in these temperatures. The trailer was now clearly beyond saving, flames visible through every window. Max needed to get Emma to warmth and safety immediately. His training offered one solution: find help, the nearest humans who could provide shelter and care. The highway. Less than a mile through the woods behind the trailer park. Cars with warm interiors. People who could help. Max gently picked Emma up again, her tiny body shivering now from cold and fear. Her cries had softened to whimpers, her energy flagging in the freezing air. Max tucked her as close to his body as possible and began moving toward the tree line, toward the distant sound of traffic that promised salvation. Behind him, the hazed trailer became a funeral pyre, flames shooting through the collapsing roof into the night sky. Max didn't look back. His mission was clear, his purpose singular. Emma must survive. As they entered the tree line, snow crunching under his burned paws, Max set a careful pace, fast enough to reach help before hypothermia claimed Emma, slow enough to keep her secure in his gentle jaws. Each step was an act of devotion, each labored breath a prayer that his strength would hold out long enough to complete this most important rescue of his life. The forest behind Pinewood Mobile Home Community was dense with pine and bare winter hardwoods, the ground covered in 3 inches of fresh snow that had fallen the previous day. For a healthy dog, the trek would have been challenging but manageable. For Max, undernourished, smoke inhalation compromised, with burned paws, it was an odyssey of pain and determination. Each step sent jolts of agony through his limbs as his burned paw pads made contact with the snow. The cold provided some numbing relief but also risked frostbite on his already damaged tissues. Max's breath came in labored pants, his lungs fighting to expel the toxic smoke particles while drawing in enough oxygen to fuel his straining muscles. Emma had fallen into an unsettling quiet, her body occasionally shuddering against the cold. The blanket she had been wrapped in provided minimal protection against the February night. Max could feel her growing cooler against his muzzle, a dangerous sign. He increased his pace, ignoring the stabbing pain in his paws, focusing entirely on the distant sound of traffic that promised salvation. The woods were not silent. Nocturnal creatures moved in the underbrush, curious and wary of this strange procession. An owl called overhead, its questioning hoot seeming to ask what Max was doing carrying this human child through the midnight forest. A fox crossed their path, pausing to watch with intelligent eyes before darting away into the shadows. Halfway to the highway, Max needed to rest. He found a fallen log relatively clear of snow and gently placed Emma down, immediately curling his body around her to provide warmth. She stirred slightly, whimpering, her tiny fingers clutching weakly at his fur. Max licked her face encouragingly, the gesture both affectionate and practical, stimulating her circulation, encouraging her to stay awake. 5 minutes was all he allowed himself. 5 precious minutes while he assessed Emma's condition and gathered his remaining strength. The smell of the highway was stronger now, exhaust fumes, rubber on asphalt, the distinct scent of human transit. Max gently picked Emma up again, his jaws aching from the prolonged, careful grip required to carry her without causing harm. The last quarter mile was the steepest, the forest giving way to a sloping embankment that led up to the elevated highway. Mac's muscles screamed in protest as he navigated the incline, testing each step to ensure solid footing despite his compromised paws. A less disciplined animal would have yielded to the pain, would have sought shelter beneath a fallen tree to await whatever fate arrived. But Max had been trained to complete his mission regardless of personal cost, and his self-appointed mission was Emma's survival. As they emerged from the tree line, the highway spread before them, 2 lanes in each direction, separated by a concrete median barrier. At this hour, traffic was sparse, the occasional semi-truck rumbling past at high speed, car headlights cutting through the darkness at irregular intervals. The shoulder was narrow, bordered by drainage ditches still partially filled with slush from the recent snowfall. Max paused at the forest edge, analyzing the situation with the tactical assessment his training had instilled. The highway represented both salvation and danger. Cars meant warm interiors and human help, but also the risk of high-speed collision. Emma needed immediate warmth, but Max needed to ensure the right kind of help stopped the situation, who would care for Emma properly. He made his decision. Moving carefully down the embankment, Max found the flattest section of the highway shoulder and gently placed Emma down. The blanket was wet from snow and nearly frozen now, offering little protection. Max leaned over her, his body providing what warmth he could spare, while positioning himself to be visible to oncoming traffic. Then he waited, eyes fixed on the distant curve where headlights would first become visible, his body a sentinel between Emma and the cold night, between Emma and whatever came next. Sarah Collins hadn't wanted to drive at night. Not since the accident. Especially not on this stretch of highway where memories lurked like highway patrolmen waiting to pull her over into grief's breakdown lane. But her father's congestive heart failure hadn't consulted her schedule or her trauma before worsening suddenly that afternoon. "It's not an emergency yet," the nurse had said over the phone, "but you might want to come sooner rather than later." Those words, sooner rather than later, had propelled Sarah through her fear and onto the road as darkness fell. The visit had been both better and worse than expected. Her father was stabilized but weakened, his once powerful farmer's frame diminished against the hospital sheets. They'd talked for hours, saying everything and nothing, until the night nurse had gently suggested Sarah get some rest at her parents' farmhouse and return in the morning. Now, driving back toward her empty condo at just past midnight, Sarah kept the radio off. The silence helped her focus, helped keep her mind from wandering to that other night drive 3 years ago, when headlights had appeared suddenly in her lane, when metal had torn and glass had shattered and lives had ended. The highway was nearly empty, just the way she preferred it. Her hands gripped the steering wheel at precisely 10 and 2 o'clock, her speed exactly 5 miles below the limit. Control was how she managed her anxiety, how she had rebuilt a life from the wreckage of what had been taken. The curve appeared ahead, the same curve where... No, she wouldn't think about that. She focused on the road, on the yellow line to her left, on the upcoming exit sign that marked 20 more miles to home. That's when she saw it, a pale shape on the highway shoulder, too large for debris, too still for a living thing, yet somehow out of place. Sarah's first instinct was to continue driving. Nothing good happened on highway shoulders at midnight, but something made her slow down, squinting through the windshield for a better look. Her headlights illuminated the scene in stages. First, the German Shepherd, standing rigid and alert on the shoulder, then the bundle beneath it, small and still. Then, most shocking of all, what appeared to be a tiny human hand extending from the bundle. "Oh my God," Sarah whispered, pulling onto the shoulder and stopping 30 yards ahead of the tableau. Her hands trembled as she reached for her cell phone, automatically dialing 911 before pausing, finger hovering over the call button. She should report this, let professionals handle whatever strange situation was unfolding on the highway shoulder. That would be the sensible thing, the safe thing. But the dispatcher would ask questions she couldn't answer, police and ambulances would take time to arrive, precious minutes in which that small hand might grow colder, might stop moving altogether. And something about the dog's posture, its obvious protective stance, suggested this was no random occurrence or accident. Sarah put down her phone and cautiously opened her car door. The February air bit at her exposed skin as she stepped onto the asphalt, her sensible boots crunching on the frozen gravel of the shoulder. "Hello?" she called, approaching slowly. "Do you need help?" The German shepherd's head snapped toward her voice, its posture instantly changing from still vigilance to alert defense. A low growl rumbled from its throat, not aggressive, but clearly warning. Sarah stopped, raising her hands to show she carried nothing threatening. "It's okay," she said softly, using the same tone she employed with frightened children on their first day of school. "I want to help." The dog's growl subsided, but its body remained tensed, ready to move if necessary. As Sarah drew closer, she could see the animal was in terrible condition. Patches of fur missing, burns visible on its legs and muzzle, its once powerful frame gaunt with malnutrition, and beneath it, partially visible now, was undeniably a human infant, wrapped in what appeared to be a frozen blanket, its face alarmingly pale in the harsh glow of Sarah's headlights. "Oh my God," Sarah repeated, her teacher's training kicking in. "Hypothermia. The baby was suffering from hypothermia, possibly frostbite. It needed immediate warming, medical attention." She took another step forward. The dog's growl returned, louder this time. Its message was clear. "You are not yet trusted. Prove yourself." "Please," Sarah said, slowly kneeling on the frozen ground, making herself smaller, less threatening. "That baby needs help, warmth, medical attention. I have a car right there with heat. I can take you both to a hospital." The dog's intelligent eyes seemed to assess her, looking beyond her words to some quality only it could perceive. Sarah remained still, heart pounding, suddenly aware of how exposed they all were on this highway shoulder, how any passing car might fail to see them, might swerve. "I lost my daughter," Sarah heard herself saying, the words emerging unbidden. 3 years ago. She was 5. Her name was Lily." She swallowed hard. "I couldn't save her, but maybe I can help save this child. Please." Something in the dog's demeanor shifted. The growl subsided, its posture relaxed slightly, not completely, but enough to suggest a tentative acceptance. It took a small step back from the infant, though remaining close enough to intervene if necessary. Sarah moved forward carefully, speaking in a continuous, gentle stream of reassurance, to the dog, to the baby, to herself. When she reached the infant, a sob caught in her throat. The baby girl, she could see it was a girl now, couldn't have been more than 8 or 9 months old. Her lips had a bluish tinge, her breathing shallow. She wore only pajamas, the blanket around her so thin and frozen it provided almost no protection. "I'm going to pick her up now," Sarah told the dog, telegraphing her movements before slowly sliding her hands beneath the infant's small body. The dog watched intently but didn't interfere as Sarah lifted the baby, immediately cradling her against the warmth of her own chest beneath her open coat. "She needs to get warm right away," Sarah said, standing carefully. "My car's just over there. You can come too." The dog seemed to understand, following closely as Sarah carried the baby toward the idling vehicle, its engine mercifully still running, heat blasting from the vents. Sarah opened the rear door first. "You can get in the back," she told the dog, surprised at herself for extending the invitation. The animal hesitated only briefly before jumping in, its movements stiff with pain and exhaustion. Sarah carried the baby to the passenger side, slipping into the front seat while keeping the infant tight against her body. She cranked the heat higher, directing the vents toward them both. "It's okay," she murmured to the barely conscious child. "You're safe now. You're going to be okay." In the rearview mirror, she could see the German shepherd settling on the back seat, its vigilant eyes never leaving the baby in her arms. An understanding passed between woman and dog in that reflected gaze, a shared purpose, a momentary trust born of necessity, and something deeper neither could name. Sarah put the car in drive, carefully pulling back onto the empty highway. The nearest hospital was in Ridgeview, 15 minutes away if she hurried. She pressed the accelerator, breaking her own careful speed limit rule for the first time in 3 years. The car accelerated smoothly, eating up the miles between the desolate stretch of highway and Ridgeview Memorial Hospital. Sarah kept the baby cradled against her with one arm while steering with the other. Not the safest arrangement, but the child needed direct body heat. Occasionally, she'd glance in the rearview mirror, meeting the German Shepherd's steady gaze. "What happened to you two?" she asked softly, not expecting an answer. "Where did you come from?" The dog's ears pricked forward at her voice, but offered no explanation. In the harsh glow of passing streetlights, Sarah could better see the extent of its injuries. Burns marked its muzzle and paws. Its breathing was labored, each inhalation a visible effort that expanded its too-thin rib cage. Most concerning was the glazed quality beginning to overtake its previously alert eyes. Shock setting in, or perhaps smoke inhalation. "Hang on," she told both passengers. "Almost there." The baby stirred against her, making a weak sound that was neither cry nor whimper, but something in between, a sound of discomfort and confusion. Sarah adjusted her hold, ensuring the child's face wasn't covered, checking that she continued breathing regularly despite her concerning lethargy. 5 more minutes, Sarah promised, though she wasn't sure either the dog or the baby could understand. Just 5 more minutes. In the back seat, the German Shepherd's condition was deteriorating visibly. It had started with a subtle shift in posture, from alert sitting to a more collapsed position, its muzzle resting on the seat cushion. Then came the coughing, harsh, racking coughs that shook its entire frame, bringing up flecks of black phlegm that stained the upholstery. Sarah's concern deepened as the dog's breathing became more labored, each inhalation a struggle that whistled ominously through its damaged airway. "Almost there, boy," she called back, her voice tight with worry. "Just stay with me." The lights of Ridgeview appeared ahead, first the glow of the town itself, then the distinctive blue-white illumination of the hospital emergency entrance. Sarah didn't bother looking for a parking space, pulling directly up to the emergency room doors and stopping in the ambulance zone. "I need help," she shouted as she pushed the driver's door open, still cradling the baby against her chest. "I have a hypothermic infant." The automatic doors slid open, and 2 nurses in scrubs rushed out, followed by an orderly with a wheelchair. "She was outside in the cold. I don't know for how long," Sarah explained rapidly as the more experienced nurse gently took the baby from her arms. "I found her on the highway shoulder. Temperature's dangerously low," the nurse confirmed, already moving toward the doors. "Possible frostbite on extremities. Get Dr. Ramirez down here stat." Sarah followed them a few steps before remembering the dog. She turned back to her car where the German Shepherd still lay on the back seat, its condition visibly worse in the harsh fluorescent light spilling from the emergency entrance. Its breathing had become shallow and irregular, its burns more angry and raw-looking than they had appeared on the dark highway. "I need help here, too," Sarah called to the orderly. "This dog, it was protecting the baby. It's injured. Burns, smoke inhalation, I think." The orderly looked uncertain. "Ma'am, we don't treat animals here. You'd need to take it to a vet." "There must be something you can do," Sarah insisted, her voice rising. "This dog saved that baby's life. I'm sure of it." A security guard approached, drawn by the commotion and the car illegally parked in the ambulance zone. "Ma'am, you need to move your vehicle." "Not until someone helps this dog," Sarah said firmly, surprising herself with her vehemence. "It's dying. Can't you see that? It saved a baby's life, and it's dying right in front of us." The standoff might have continued if a doctor hadn't emerged from the sliding doors, pulling on a coat against the cold. "What's going on here?" he asked, taking in the scene with professional efficiency. "This woman brought in a hypothermic infant," the orderly explained. "Dr. Ramirez is with her now. But there's also this injured dog." The doctor, his badge read Dr. Wilson, Trauma Surgery, leaned into Sarah's car, his expression changing as he examined the German Shepherd. "This animal needs immediate veterinary attention. Burns, smoke inhalation. Was there a fire?" I think so, Sarah said, realizing she had simply assumed this based on the dog's condition. I found them on the highway. The dog was protecting the baby. Dr. Wilson straightened, pulling out his phone. My brother's a veterinarian. His clinic is 10 minutes from here. I'm calling him now. Into the phone, he said, James? It's Mike. Emergency situation. I need you to meet me at your clinic immediately. The response must have been affirmative because Dr. Wilson nodded, then turned to Sarah. Can you drive this dog to Ridgeview Animal Hospital? It's on Oak Street, about 2 miles from here. My brother will meet you there. Sarah hesitated, torn between staying with the baby and helping the dog. What about the little girl? She's in good hands with Dr. Ramirez, Dr. Wilson assured her. She's our best pediatrician. But this dog doesn't have much time. The decision crystallized for Sarah in that moment. The baby would receive excellent care here, surrounded by medical professionals. The dog, this brave, loyal animal who had clearly risked everything to save a child, had only her. I'll take him now, she said, already moving toward the driver's side. Oak Street, you said? Yes, big brick building on the right. My brother will be waiting. As Sarah slid back behind the wheel, she locked eyes once more with the German Shepherd in her rearview mirror. Its gaze was unfocused now, its breathing shallow and irregular. But as she started the engine, it made a visible effort to lift its head, looking past her toward the hospital doors, where the baby had disappeared. She'll be okay, Sarah told it, her voice breaking slightly. Now we need to make sure you will be too. She pulled away from the emergency entrance, following Dr. Wilson's directions toward the animal hospital. In the back seat, the German Shepherd's continued to decline. Its eyes drifted closed, its breathing becoming increasingly labored. Twice it was racked by coughing fits that produced more black phlegm. Stay with me, Sarah urged, pressing harder on the accelerator. Please stay with me. You've done your job. You saved her. Now let me save you. The German Shepherd made no response. Its powerful body, once capable of carrying a child through snow and cold, now lay still except for the increasingly erratic rise and fall of its chest. Sarah felt tears burning in her eyes as she raced through the empty streets of Ridgeview, praying they would reach help in time. The brick building of Ridgeview Animal Hospital appeared ahead, a single light burning in the reception area. As Sarah screeched to a halt in the parking lot, the front door opened and a man in jeans and a hastily donned white coat emerged. Clearly Dr. Wilson's brother. In here, quickly, he called. Sarah opened the rear door of her car, and her heart sank. The German Shepherd lay completely still, no visible rise and fall of its chest, no flicker of movement in its closed eyes. No, she whispered. No, please no. Crossing the desert alight, with a thump back on a cigarette, like he was delayed in action, determined. Dr. James Wilson reached past her, pressing his fingers against the dog's neck, searching for a pulse. His expression was grave but determined as he scooped the massive animal into his arms with surprising strength. He's still with us, the veterinarian said grimly, already turning toward the clinic doors. But barely. We need to move fast. Sarah followed them inside, her heart pounding, praying that this night would not claim another life. Not this brave dog who had already given so much, who deserved so much more than to die on the back seat of a stranger's car after performing one final heroic rescue. The pediatric trauma unit at Ridgeview Memorial hummed with controlled urgency as Dr. Ramirez and her team worked on the infant Sarah had brought in. Emma, identified by the name embroidered on her frozen pajamas, had arrived with a core temperature of 91 degrees, dangerously hypothermic but not yet critical. Her tiny fingers and toes showed early signs of frostbite. Her breathing was shallow and she was severely dehydrated. Get warming blankets, Dr. Ramirez ordered, her calm voice belying the gravity of the situation. Start a warm saline IV. I want her temperature up 2 degrees in the next hour, no faster or we risk shock. Nurses moved with practiced efficiency, wrapping Emma in specialized warming blankets, gently inserting an IV into her nearly collapsed veins, attaching monitors that beeped steadily with her heart rate and oxygen levels. A respiratory therapist stood by, ready to intervene if her breathing deteriorated further. X-rays revealed no broken bones, but blood work showed concerning levels of carbon monoxide in her system, evidence of smoke inhalation. A more thorough examination revealed superficial burns on her left arm and minor smoke damage to her lungs. The medical team added oxygen therapy to her treatment plan, a small mask covering most of her tiny face. "She's stable," Dr. Ramirez told the charge nurse 2 hours later, "but I want her monitored continuously. And call social services. We need to find out where this child came from and how she ended up on a highway in the middle of winter." Across town at Ridgeview Animal Hospital, Max's condition was far more dire. Dr. James Wilson had rushed the unconscious German Shepherd into his surgery suite, immediately inserting an oxygen tube and starting IV fluids. The examination revealed the full extent of Max's injuries. Second-degree burns on all 4 paw pads, burns along his muzzle and chest, severe smoke inhalation that had damaged his lungs, dehydration, and malnutrition that had left him with minimal reserves to fight for recovery. "He's been neglected for months," Dr. Wilson told Sarah, who refused to leave the clinic's waiting room. "The malnutrition was pre-existing, not from tonight's ordeal. And these older scars, someone mistreated this animal long before the burns." Sarah's hands twisted in her lap. "Will he make it?" Dr. Wilson's expression was grave. "I won't lie to you. His chances aren't good. The smoke inhalation alone would be serious for a healthy dog. Combined with the burns, the hypothermia from exposure, and his pre-existing condition," he shook his head, "we're doing everything we can, but prepare yourself for the possibility that he won't pull through." In the treatment room, Max lay unconscious on a padded table, an oxygen mask over his muzzle, IV fluids dripping steadily into his foreleg, burn cream applied to his damaged paws and wrapped in soft bandages. Monitors beeped with his heart rate, too fast, then alarmingly slow, and his oxygen levels, which remained stubbornly low despite supplemental oxygen. Dr. Wilson administered antibiotics to prevent infection in the burned tissue, pain medication to keep Max comfortable, and bronchodilators to help his damaged airways. Then came the waiting, that terrible period where medicine had done all it could and recovery depended on the patient's will to survive. "I've done everything medically possible," Dr. Wilson told Sarah around 4 a.m. "Now we wait and see if he's strong enough to pull through. You should go back to the hospital, check on the little girl. There's nothing more you can do here." But Sarah couldn't bring herself to leave. Something about the German Shepherd's steadfast devotion to the baby resonated with her in ways she couldn't articulate. She settled into an uncomfortable waiting room chair, promising to call the hospital for updates on Emma. As dawn broke over Ridgeview, both patients had stabilized but remained critical. Emma's temperature had risen to 96 degrees, still low but no longer life-threatening. Her oxygen levels were improving, and she had begun to respond to stimuli, weakly grasping a nurse's finger when it brushed her palm. Max's condition, however, continued to decline. His damaged lungs struggled to process oxygen. His heartbeat grew increasingly erratic, and his kidneys showed signs of stress from processing toxins from his burned tissue. Dr. Wilson added more medications to the IV, adjusted the oxygen flow, and gently cleaned the wounds again. But his expression grew more somber with each passing hour. "His body is shutting down," he told Sarah quietly as morning sunlight streamed through the clinic windows. "He's fighting, but—" The unspoken conclusion hung in the air between them. Sarah wiped tears from her eyes. "Can I sit with him? I don't want him to be alone." Dr. Wilson hesitated, then nodded. "Of course. Talk to him if you want. They can still hear us, even when unconscious." Sarah entered the treatment room slowly, shocked anew by Max's condition. In the daylight, his injuries seemed even more severe, his once powerful body diminished against the white treatment table. She pulled a stool alongside him and gently stroked the unburned patch of fur behind his ear. "You did it," she whispered to him. "Emma is safe. She's getting better. You saved her life." Max's only response was the labored rise and fall of his chest. Each breath a battle his body was gradually losing strength to fight. By mid-morning, the story had broken. A night janitor at the hospital had overheard the staff discussing the baby found on the highway and had called his cousin, who worked at the local news station. A reporter arrived at Ridgeview Memorial just as police were setting up a press area in response to multiple media inquiries. At approximately midnight, an infant girl was brought to Ridgeview Memorial Hospital suffering from hypothermia and minor burns, Officer Thompson stated at the hastily arranged press conference. She was found on Highway 16 by a passing motorist. Initial investigation suggests the child may have been rescued from a residential fire by a dog, specifically a German Shepherd, who was also injured in the incident. The press corps erupted with questions. Where was the fire? Who owned the dog? Who were the baby's parents? Had there been fatalities? Officer Thompson provided what limited information he could, confirming that a mobile home fire had been reported at Pinewood Mobile Home Community around the same time, and that human remains had been discovered in the debris. "We are working to confirm the identities of the victims and their relationship to the infant," Thompson added. The dog was transported to Ridgeview Animal Hospital in critical condition. The story exploded across local media, then regional, then national. By afternoon, news vans lined the street outside both the hospital and the veterinary clinic. Social media lit up with hashtags: Highway Hero, Rescue Dog, Max the Protector, the last arising after Dr. Wilson had reluctantly confirmed the dog's name from his worn collar tag. Public reaction was immediate and passionate, but notably divided. Many hailed Max as a hero, a remarkable example of canine loyalty and intelligence. Others expressed skepticism about the narrative, questioning whether a dog could have truly understood the danger and intentionally rescued a child. "Dogs don't think like that," argued one television commentator. "This was likely just animal instinct to flee a fire, and the dog simply brought along something it considered part of its pack." "You're ignoring decades of research on canine cognition," countered another. "Dogs have demonstrably saved humans in numerous documented cases. This isn't anthropomorphism, it's recognizing genuine cross-species empathy and protection." The debate intensified when footage emerged from a neighbor's security camera showing Max carrying Emma from the burning trailer and into the woods. The grainy nighttime video quickly went viral, with millions viewing the 12-second clip of the determined dog navigating through smoke with the small bundle clutched carefully in his jaws. Support for Max swelled. A crowdfunding campaign for his veterinary care raised over $20,000 in hours. Children sent hand-drawn get-well cards to the clinic. A toy company announced plans for a Hero Max plush dog, with profits directed to animal rescue organizations. Yet skeptics remained vocal. Some questioned why the dog hadn't awakened the parents first, suggesting a potential dark twist to the story. Others focused on the neglected condition of both Max and Emma prior to the fire, demanding investigations into parental fitness and animal cruelty. The controversy only intensified when Frank Miller, a reporter for the Ridgeview Gazette, uncovered Max's past as a search and rescue dog. His article, "From Professional Rescuer to Family Hero, The Remarkable Journey of Max," detailed the German Shepherd's earlier career and mysterious disappearance from the Mountain County K-9 unit. Officer Jenkins, Max's former handler, was tracked down by multiple news outlets. "I'm not surprised," he told a tearful interviewer. "Max was always exceptional. Being a hero isn't something you train, it's something that's in their heart. I just wish—" His voice broke. "I just wish I'd looked harder for him when he went missing." As the media circus grew, Sarah remained at the veterinary clinic, refusing all interview requests, focused solely on the declining German Shepherd, who had unwittingly captured national attention. The first thing Linda Hayes was aware of was pain, searing, all-encompassing pain that radiated from her smoke-damaged lungs through her entire body. The second was the antiseptic smell of the hospital room where she found herself, bandages covering burns on her arms, an oxygen mask over her face. Memory returned in disjointed flashes. Heat, smoke, panic, running, then nothing. A nurse noticed she was awake and immediately called for the doctor. Within minutes, a grave-faced physician was checking her vitals while a police officer waited by the door. "Mrs. Hayes," the doctor said gently, "you're at County General. You suffered smoke inhalation and minor burns in a fire at your residence. Do you understand?" Linda nodded weakly, then tried to speak, managing only a hoarse whisper. "Rick? My husband?" The doctor and nurse exchanged glances. "I'm very sorry, Mrs. Hayes. Your husband didn't survive the fire." Linda closed her eyes, tears seeping from beneath her lids. Despite everything, the drinking, the arguments, the disappointments, Rick had been her husband, her partner in their damaged life. Now he was gone. Then a more terrible thought struck her, her eyes flying open in panic. "Emma, where's my baby? Where's Emma?" The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the steady beep of her heart monitor, suddenly accelerating with her distress. "Mrs. Hayes," the police officer stepped forward, "can you tell us what you remember about last night? Specifically about your daughter?" Cold dread washed over Linda. Why were they asking her this? Why wasn't anyone telling her about Emma? The monitor beeped faster as her panic grew. "She was in her crib," Linda said, voice cracking. "In her room." "Where is she? Please tell me. Is she okay? Is she alive?" The officer's expression remained neutral. "Mrs. Hayes, when firefighters responded to the blaze, you were found unconscious on the front lawn. You had apparently escaped through a window. Your husband was found inside. Your daughter was not in the residence." "Not in the residence." The words echoed in Linda's mind, incomprehensible at first, then horrifyingly clear. Emma wasn't there. She wasn't in the trailer. Which meant, "Oh, God," Linda moaned, memory suddenly crystallizing. The smoke alarm blaring, waking disoriented, still half drunk, the hallway filled with smoke, panic overwhelming rational thought, the window in her bedroom, her escape, and in that moment of terror, of survival instinct overriding everything else, she had forgotten Emma. "I left her," Linda whispered, the admission tearing from her throat like physical pain. "I left my baby in the fire." The officer exchanged glances with the doctor before continuing. "Mrs. Hayes, your daughter has been found. She's alive." Linda's sob of relief quickly transformed to confusion. "Found? Where? How?" "That's what we're trying to determine," the officer said. "She was discovered on Highway 16, approximately 1 mile from your residence. She had been transported there, apparently by your dog. Max?" Linda's confusion deepened. "Max took Emma from the fire?" "It appears so. Your daughter suffered hypothermia and minor smoke inhalation, but is expected to recover fully. She's currently at Ridgeview Memorial Hospital. Your dog was also severely injured and is receiving veterinary care." Linda tried to process this information through her grief and shock. Max, the neglected, often mistreated dog, had saved Emma when she herself had failed, had chosen to rescue a child while she, Emma's mother, had saved only herself. "I need to see her," Lyndon said, already trying to push herself up from the bed. "I need to see my daughter now." The doctor gently restrained her. "Mrs. Hayes, you're not stable enough to be transported, and there are legal considerations that need to be addressed." "Legal considerations?" Linda repeated, her voice rising hysterically. "She's my daughter." "I'm her mother." "Ma'am," the officer said firmly, "you left your child in a burning building. There will be an investigation into potential charges of child endangerment and neglect. Child Protective Services has been notified and has temporary custody of Emma, pending that investigation." The words struck Linda like physical blows. Her daughter was alive but legally removed from her care. Her husband was dead, her home destroyed, and the full weight of her actions, not just fleeing the fire without Emma, but the months of neglect that had preceded it, came crashing down upon her. "Please," she begged, her voice breaking. "Please let me see her, just once. I need to know she's okay. I need to tell her I'm sorry." The doctor and officer exchanged glances again, something unspoken passing between them. "We'll see what can be arranged," the doctor finally said. "But for now you need to focus on your own recovery. And Mrs. Hayes, there will be many difficult questions in the days ahead." Left alone in her hospital room, Linda curled onto her side despite the pain from her burns, sobs racking her body. In the clear light of sobriety and trauma, she saw the full pattern of her life. The wasted years, the squandered chances, the slow poisoning of alcohol, the neglect of the one person who depended on her most, and she saw with excruciating clarity that she had been given a second chance only through the actions of a dog she had barely tolerated and frequently ignored. "Max," she whispered into her pillow, "thank you for saving my baby, for being better than I was." 3 days after the fire, Sarah had established a routine that revolved entirely around 2 patients in 2 different facilities. Mornings at Ridgeview Memorial with Emma, afternoons and evenings at the Animal Hospital with Max. Though she had no legal relationship to either, the hospital staff had grown accustomed to her presence, tacitly acknowledging her role in saving both lives. Emma was improving steadily. Her lungs were clearing, her temperature had normalized, and she had begun smiling at the nurses who cared for her. The social worker assigned to her case, Carol Walker, was a kind-faced woman in her 50s who visited daily, consulting with doctors and making notes in a thick file. "She's resilient," Carol told Sarah during one of their now regular coffee breaks in the hospital cafeteria. "Children often are, more than we give them credit for." "What will happen to her?" Sarah asked, the question she'd been avoiding since the first night. Carol sighed. "Her mother survived the fire. She's at County General with smoke inhalation and burns. Once she's medically stable, there will be a hearing about custody. Given the circumstances, abandoning a child during a fire, previous reports of neglect, it's unlikely she'll regain custody immediately, if at all. And then what, foster care?" "Most likely, unless a family member comes forward." Carol studied Sarah's face. "You've become very attached to her." Sarah looked down at her coffee. "I lost my daughter 3 years ago. She was 5. The admission still hurt, but the pain had dulled slightly with each retelling. "Being with Emma, it doesn't fix anything, but it helps somehow." Carol nodded understandingly. "Have you spoken with the mother at all?" "No," Sarah said quickly. "I'm not sure I could face her, knowing she left her baby behind." "People make terrible mistakes in moments of panic," Carol said gently, not excusing it, just acknowledging the reality. Sarah was saved from responding by the arrival of Officer Thompson, who had been investigating the fire and its aftermath. He spotted them and approached their table, his expression unusually somber. "Miss Collins, could I speak with you privately?" Sarah followed him to a quiet corner of the cafeteria, anxiety flickering through her. Had something happened to Max? "I've been reviewing the background of the Hayes family," Officer Thompson began without preamble, "including prior incidents involving Rick Hayes." He hesitated. "Miss Collins, I believe you've encountered Mr. Hayes before, 3 years ago, on Highway 16, just past the Millfield exit." Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. "What are you saying?" Officer Thompson slid a police report across the table. "Rick Hayes was the drunk driver who crossed the center line that night, the one who hit your family's car." The cafeteria seemed to tilt around Sarah. Her hand trembled as she pushed the report away without reading it. She didn't need to see the official documentation. The memory of headlights in her lane, the scream of metal, the silence that followed was permanently etched in her mind. "He served 14 months for vehicular manslaughter," Officer Thompson continued quietly. "Was released about a year ago, and now he's dead," Sarah whispered. "And I'm caring for his child. I thought you should know before it became public knowledge. The press is digging into everything about this story." Sarah nodded mechanically, still processing this devastating connection. All this time, she had carried the faceless image of the drunk driver who had destroyed her family, a nameless entity of rage and recklessness. Now that abstraction had a name, a face, a history, and a daughter who had somehow come into Sarah's care through the actions of a heroic dog. "Does his wife know about what he did?" Sarah asked. "I don't believe so. Hayes was released from prison shortly before she became pregnant. I suspect he didn't share that particular history with her." Sarah sat in silence, emotions warring within her. Anger, grief, a strange sense of cosmic connection, and underneath it all a question she couldn't yet articulate. What did this mean for her relationship with Emma? "Thank you for telling me," she finally said, rising unsteadily. "I need some time to process this." She walked outside to the hospital garden, finding a secluded bench beneath a barren oak tree. The February air was still cold, but Sarah barely noticed, her mind replaying fragmented images. The accident scene, the funerals, the emptiness that followed, and now the tiny face of Emma, innocent daughter of the man who had shattered her world. "What am I supposed to do with this?" she whispered to the winter sky. No answer came, only the distant sound of traffic and the muffled activity of the hospital behind her. The revelation about Rick Hayes rippled outward, first in Sarah's consciousness, then through the official channels of the case, as the connection was formally noted in police reports and social service documents. By the time Linda Hayes was well enough to be transported to Ridgeview for her first supervised visit with Emma, the information had become part of the complex legal landscape surrounding the child's future. The visit itself was fraught with emotion. Linda, still wheelchair-bound due to her injuries, wept upon seeing Emma, reaching for her with bandaged hands. Emma, who had bonded with her nurses and with Sarah, regarded her mother with the wary curiosity of an infant who recognized but didn't fully remember a familiar face. "She's so beautiful," Linda said through tears, touching Emma's cheek with trembling fingers. "I'm so sorry, baby girl. Mommy's so sorry." Carol Walker observed quietly from the corner, making notes, while a hospital social worker supervised the interaction. Sarah had chosen not to be present, still unsure how to reconcile her feelings about Linda, a neglectful mother who had fled a fire without her child, but also a woman who had unknowingly married the man responsible for killing Sarah's family. After the visit, legal proceedings began in earnest. The district attorney considered criminal charges against Linda for child endangerment, while Child Protective Services petitioned for permanent removal of Emma from her mother's custody. Linda, now sober by force of circumstance, obtained a public defender and fought desperately to maintain her parental rights. The case became a flashpoint for public debate. Local talk radio buzzed with competing perspectives, those who believed in Linda's maternal rights versus those who prioritized Emma's welfare above biological connections. Legal experts weighed in on television regarding the standards for terminating parental rights and the thresholds for criminal negligence. Meanwhile, Emma remained in hospital longer than medically necessary, a bureaucratic limbo while the system determined her fate. Sarah visited daily, bringing toys and books, singing lullabies that she had once sung to Lily. The nursing staff tacitly supported her growing bond with Emma, often scheduling their breaks during Sarah's visits to allow them privacy. "She lights up when you arrive," one nurse confided to Sarah. "That kind of connection can't be manufactured." 2 weeks after the fire, Judge Martha Reynolds called an unusual preliminary hearing in her chambers rather than open court, seeking to shield the case from the media circus that had developed. Present were Carol Walker, Linda's attorney, the assistant district attorney, and, to Sarah's surprise, Sarah herself, invited at Carol's suggestion. "This is an extraordinarily complex case," Judge Reynolds began, looking at each person in turn. "We have a mother who, while demonstrating previous patterns of neglect, fled a burning building in panic, something many might do in similar circumstances. We have a child who was saved by remarkable intervention, not by state agencies, but by an animal and a passing Good Samaritan. And we have Miss Collins, who has no legal standing but has demonstrated consistent care and concern for Emma." The judge turned to Linda, who sat pale and determined in her wheelchair. "Mrs. Hayes, your attorney has submitted a proposal for reunification. including substance abuse treatment, parenting classes, and supervised visitation. While commendable, this raises the question, is this genuine change or simply response to a crisis? Linda's voice was hoarse but steady. Your Honor, I can't change what happened. I can only try to be better now. Emma is all I have left. Judge Reynolds nodded, then addressed Sarah. Miss Collins, Carol Walker informs me that you've formed a significant attachment to Emma. Given the unusual circumstances connecting you to this family, how do you see your role going forward? Sarah hadn't expected to be asked this question so directly. She took a deep breath. I care deeply about Emma's welfare. I wasn't looking to become part of her life, but now that I am, I can't imagine walking away from her. The unspoken question hung in the air. Could Sarah truly care for the child of the man who had killed her family? The answer came from a place deeper than conscious thought. Yes, Emma was not her father. Emma was simply a child who needed love and stability. This case will not be resolved quickly, Judge Reynolds concluded. In the interim, Emma needs a placement outside the hospital. Mrs. Hayes is not currently able to provide appropriate care due to her injuries and pending legal matters. Therefore, I'm ordering temporary foster placement. She looked directly at Sarah. Ms. Walker has suggested you might be willing to serve as Emma's foster parent temporarily, Ms. Collins. You've already been expedited through preliminary background checks. Would you be willing to take on this responsibility? Sarah felt the weight of the judge's question, not just the practical implications of caring for an infant, but the emotional complexity of fostering the child of the man who had destroyed her family. Yet when she pictured Emma's face, the answer was clear. Yes, Your Honor, I would be honored to care for Emma for as long as she needs me. The judge nodded, making a note in her file. Supervised visitation for Mrs. Hayes will be arranged twice weekly. Ms. Collins, this is a temporary arrangement pending further hearings. Do you understand? I do, Sarah replied, already mentally preparing her home for a baby's arrival. Linda's expression was a complex mixture of gratitude and loss. Thank you, she said quietly to Sarah, for saving her when I couldn't, for loving her when I failed. Sarah met the younger woman's eyes, seeing past her initial judgment to the broken person beneath, someone who had made terrible mistakes but who loved her daughter in her own flawed way. She's worth saving, worth loving. While Emma's situation was slowly resolving into a temporary solution, Max's condition continued to deteriorate at Ridgeview Animal Hospital. The German Shepherd had rallied briefly after the first night, even regaining consciousness long enough to respond to Dr. Wilson's voice commands. But the extensive damage to his lungs from smoke inhalation, combined with the severity of his burns and his pre-existing malnutrition, created a perfect storm of medical complications. By the end of the first week, Max had developed pneumonia, his already compromised lungs now battling infection along with chemical damage. His kidneys began showing signs of failure as they struggled to process medications and toxins. The burns on his paws and muzzle, despite careful treatment, showed minimal improvement. I've consulted with specialists at the University Veterinary Hospital, Dr. Wilson told Sarah during her evening visit. They agree that his prognosis is extremely poor. Even if we were to transfer him there for more advanced care, the likelihood of recovery is less than 10%. Sarah sat beside Max's treatment table, her hand resting gently on an unburned patch of his shoulder. The once powerful dog was now connected to multiple IV lines, an oxygen mask covering his muzzle. His breathing labored despite maximum intervention. His eyes remained closed, his body responding only to pain stimuli. "Is suffering," Dr. Wilson said gently. "I believe it's time to consider humane euthanasia." Sarah's tears fell silently onto Max's fur. He fought so hard, saved Emma when everyone else failed her, and that's exactly why letting him go might be the final kindness we can offer him. He completed his mission. Emma is safe because of him. Sarah nodded slowly, the weight of the decision settling over her. "Can I have one more night with him?" to say goodbye properly, and there's someone else who should have the chance to thank him." Dr. Wilson agreed, though his expression made clear he wasn't optimistic that Max would survive until morning. "Call me any time if his condition changes. I live upstairs." Left alone with Max, Sarah pulled her chair closer, continuing the one-sided conversation she'd maintained throughout her vigils. "Emma's coming home with me tomorrow. Not permanently, but for now. She'll have her own room with a proper crib and toys." I wish you could see it. Max's only response was the mechanical rise and fall of his chest. Each breath a battle. His body was losing the strength to fight. Officer Jenkins called again. "He's coming to see you tomorrow. Bringing your old vest from the search and rescue days. He said you earned the right to wear it one more time." Through the night, Sarah alternated between talking to Max and reading aloud from news articles about his heroism. The crowdfunding for his care had reached nearly $50,000. Children across the country were drawing pictures of him carrying Emma to safety. A prominent sculptor had offered to create a bronze statue for the Ridgeview town square. "You're famous, Max," Sarah told him, stroking his ear. "A genuine hero." Dawn arrived with no improvement. Dr. Wilson checked Max's vitals, his expression confirming what Sarah already knew. The end was approaching, with or without medical intervention. Max's organs were shutting down, his body finally surrendering after its extraordinary final act of service. "I've made arrangements for Linda Hayes to visit briefly this morning," Sarah said. "She's being transported from the hospital by ambulance. She needed to thank him herself." Dr. Wilson nodded understandingly. "We'll make him as comfortable as possible, but I don't think we should wait beyond today. He's holding on by a thread." 2 hours later, Linda Hayes was wheeled into the clinic, her hospital gown covered by a robe, her face still bearing the marks of smoke and trauma. When she saw Max, the tubes, the monitors, the terrible stillness of his once vigorous body, she broke down, reaching out to touch him with bandaged hands. "I'm so sorry," she whispered to the unconscious dog, "for everything, for not seeing what you were, for not treating you better. Thank you for saving my baby girl." Max showed no sign of hearing her words, his breathing growing more labored by the hour. Linda's time with him was necessarily brief, her own medical condition requiring her return to the hospital. Before leaving, she pressed her forehead briefly against Max's, whispering something only he could hear. With Linda gone, Sarah knew the time had come. Dr. Wilson prepared the injection that would end Max's suffering, explaining the process in gentle terms, how Max would feel no pain, how his breathing would simply slow and then stop. "Would you like a few minutes alone with him first?" the veterinarian asked. Sarah nodded, tears blurring her vision as she leaned close to Max's ear. "You did everything right, brave boy. Emma's safe. She'll grow up knowing about you, about how special you were. You can rest now." Dr. Wilson returned, syringe in hand, his own eyes suspiciously bright. "Whenever you're ready." Sarah took a deep breath, preparing to give the permission that would end Max's suffering, her hand resting on his still form as she whispered a final goodbye to the remarkable dog who had connected her to Emma, who had unwittingly brought her back to life, even as his own ebbed away. The needle was poised above Max's foreleg when Sarah's phone rang. She glanced at the screen. It was Carol Walker. "I'm sorry," Sarah said to Dr. Wilson. "I need to take this. It's about Emma." Dr. Wilson nodded, placing the syringe on a nearby tray. "Take your time." Sarah stepped outside the treatment room. "Carol, is everything okay?" "Everything's fine," the social worker assured her. "I'm at the hospital with Emma. We're completing the discharge paperwork now. I just wanted to confirm you'll be here at 2 o'clock for the foster placement." "About that," Sarah said, her voice catching. "I'm at the animal hospital with Max. We're saying goodbye. Dr. Wilson thinks it's time." There was a moment of silence on the line before Carol spoke again, her voice gentle. "Would it help if we came there? Emma should have the chance to say goodbye, too. They saved each other, after all." Sarah hadn't considered this possibility. Are you sure that's appropriate? In my professional opinion, yes. Even at her age, children sense loss. And frankly, bringing Emma might help you too. 40 minutes later, Carol arrived at Ridgeview Animal Hospital with Emma bundled in a new pink snowsuit, a donation from the hospital staff. Sarah met them in the waiting room, taking Emma into her arms with practiced ease, as if they'd been together far longer than a few tumultuous days. "Dr. Wilson says we can bring her in to see Max," Sarah explained quietly. "He's very weak, but he's hanging on." Carol nodded understandingly. "I'll wait out here. Take all the time you need." Sarah carried Emma into the treatment room, where Max lay unmoving except for the shallow rise and fall of his chest. Dr. Wilson stood respectfully to one side, having temporarily removed the oxygen mask to make Max more approachable for the baby. "Hey, sweet girl," Sarah said softly to Emma. "This is Max. He's the one who took such good care of you." She carefully lowered Emma to where she could see the German Shepherd, supporting her in a sitting position on the edge of the treatment table. Emma's eyes widened at the sight of Max, some spark of recognition flickering across her face. Her small hand reached out, patting his fur with surprising gentleness. "Ma," she said clearly, her first distinct sound since the fire. Then something remarkable happened. Emma broke into a sudden, joyous laugh, a bright, bubbling sound of pure delight, completely at odds with the somber atmosphere of the room. It was the uninhibited laugh of a baby who recognized something deeply familiar and beloved. At the sound, Max's ear twitched, his breathing pattern changed, and then, so subtly that Sarah thought she might be imagining it, his tail moved. The barest twitch against the treatment table. "Dr. Wilson," Sarah whispered, afraid to hope. "Did you see that?" The veterinarian stepped closer, his clinical detachment momentarily forgotten. "I did." Emma laughed again, her tiny hands now planted on Max's side, feeling the warmth of his body. This time Max's response was unmistakable. His eyes opened, unfocused at first, then slowly turning toward the source of that joyful sound. "Oh my God," Sarah breathed, tears springing to her eyes. "He hears her." Dr. Wilson was already checking Max's vitals, professional demeanor restored but with an undercurrent of cautious excitement. "His heart rate is steadier, respiration improving slightly." He looked up at Sarah. "Keep talking to him. Keep Emma talking to him." For the next 30 minutes, Sarah sat with Emma on her lap beside Max, encouraging the baby's interaction with gentle words and demonstrations. Emma seemed intuitively to understand the importance of the moment. Her small hands repeatedly touching Max's muzzle, her laughter coming whenever the dog showed any response, and Max was responding. Weakly at first, then with growing strength, his tail moved more definitively. His eyes tracked Emma's movements. At one point he even lifted his head slightly, as if trying to get a better view of the baby he had risked everything to save. Dr. Wilson monitored these developments with restrained optimism, repeatedly checking Max's vital signs, adjusting medications, making notes in his chart. "What's happening?" Sarah finally asked. "Yesterday you said there was no hope." The veterinarian shook his head, wonder evident in his expression. "Medically speaking, nothing should have changed. His injuries are still severe, his prognosis still poor. But sometimes," he gestured to where Emma was gently patting Max's ear, "sometimes patients find a reason to fight that goes beyond medical explanation." Over the next several hours, Max continued to show small but significant improvements. He accepted water from a syringe, his first voluntary intake in days. His oxygen level stabilized enough that Dr. Wilson reduced the supplemental flow. Most remarkably, when Emma was placed near him in a portable crib for a nap, Max's vital signs strengthened further, as if her proximity provided strength his medical interventions couldn't match. By evening, Dr. Wilson had cautiously revised his assessment. "He's still critical, make no mistake, but if he continues this trend overnight, there might be reason for hope." When Carol returned to take Emma to Sarah's home for their first night as a foster family, Dr. Wilson made an unprecedented suggestion. "Would you consider bringing her back tomorrow, and perhaps the day after? I can't explain it medically, but her presence seems to be the best medicine Max could receive." Sarah agreed without hesitation, arranging to bring Emma for daily visits. For the first time since the fire, she left the animal hospital with genuine hope, carrying Emma toward a future that suddenly seemed less certain but infinitely more promising than it had just hours before. The improvement continued over subsequent days, gradual but unmistakable. Max began accepting small amounts of food, his burns showed signs of healing, and his breathing strengthened. Each visit from Emma seemed to provide renewed motivation, as if her presence reminded him of his purpose. 2 weeks after Emma's first visit, nearly a month after the fire, Dr. Wilson delivered the news Sarah had begun to hope for. "He's ready to go home," he said, reviewing Max's latest test results. "He'll need ongoing care, medication, and regular checkups, but medically speaking, he no longer needs to be hospitalized." Sarah looked up from where she was helping Emma read a picture book to Max. "Home? But where?" She trailed off, the question answering itself even as she asked it. Dr. Wilson smiled. "The foster placement agreement included approval for a pet, didn't it? I believe that was specifically added by Judge Reynolds." And so, on a bright March morning, Max left Ridgeview Animal Hospital on shaky legs but under his own power, walking slowly beside Sarah's car as she opened the door for him. In the back seat, Emma sat securely in her car seat, babbling happily at the sight of her protector joining their small family. "Welcome home, Max," Sarah said as the German Shepherd settled carefully into the passenger seat, his gaze immediately finding Emma in the rear-view mirror. "Let's go home." The custody hearing for Emma Hayes was scheduled for early April, giving all parties time to prepare their cases and, in Linda's case, to continue her physical and emotional recovery. Sarah had been fostering Emma for 6 weeks by then, establishing a routine that included not only Max, but also regular supervised visits with Linda at the family court offices. These visits were initially tense, Linda still struggling with guilt and grief, Sarah working through her complicated feelings about her connection to the Hayes family. But gradually, a cautious understanding developed between the two women, centered entirely on their shared concern for Emma's well-being. "She's thriving with you," Linda acknowledged during one visit, watching Emma stack blocks with growing dexterity. "I see that. She asks for you," Sarah replied, using the generous interpretation of Emma's babbles that all adults apply to developing infants. "She knows you're her mother." The courtroom on the day of the hearing was closed to the public and press, Judge Reynolds having determined that Emma's privacy outweighed the media's interest in the case. Present were the principals, Linda, Sarah, Carol Walker, along with attorneys, court officers, and expert witnesses, prepared to testify about Emma's developmental needs and Linda's parenting capacity. Linda had prepared meticulously for this day. 2 months sober, she had voluntarily entered an intensive outpatient substance abuse program while still recovering from her physical injuries. She had completed parenting classes, attended grief counseling, and secured modest housing in a subsidized apartment complex. She had even found part-time work as a receptionist at a local church, the pastor having been moved by her story and determination to rebuild her life. "Your Honor," her attorney argued, "Mrs. Hayes has demonstrated extraordinary commitment to rehabilitation. She has acknowledged her past failures and taken concrete steps to address the underlying issues that contributed to them. More importantly, she has maintained consistent visitation with Emma, demonstrating the strong maternal bond that exists between them." The state's attorney countered with evidence of the pre-fire neglect, the abandonment during the emergency, and expert testimony about the critical importance of stability in Emma's early development. Carol Walker provided a balanced assessment, acknowledging Linda's progress while emphasizing the need for continued supervision and support. Throughout the proceedings, Sarah sat quietly, her testimony having been given earlier in the day. She had spoken honestly about her attachment to Emma, but also about her recognition of Linda's efforts and the importance of the mother-daughter bond. When asked directly by Judge Reynolds if she was seeking permanent custody, Sarah's answer had surprised many in the courtroom. "No, Your Honor, I believe Emma belongs with her mother, when Linda's ready to provide the safe, stable home Emma deserves. Until then, I'm honored to care for her and to help maintain their connection." After hearing all testimony, Judge Reynolds took an unusual step, inviting Linda, Sarah, and Carol into her chambers for a private conversation before issuing her ruling. "Mrs. Hayes," the judge began once they were seated, "your progress is commendable. However, Emma's welfare must remain the court's primary concern. I'm inclined toward a graduated reunification plan rather than an immediate return to your custody." Linda nodded, hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I understand, Your Honor." "Ms. Collins," Judge Reynolds continued, "your role in this situation has been extraordinary. Few people would have shown the compassion you've demonstrated, particularly given the complex history involved." Sarah met the judge's gaze steadily. "Emma changed something in me. She deserves all the love both Linda and I can give her." Judge Reynolds studied both women thoughtfully. "What I'm about to propose is unconventional, but may serve Emma's best interests. Mrs. Hayes, would you consider relocating to the apartment complex where Miss Collins lives? This would allow for increasingly extended visitation while maintaining proximity to Emma's current support system." The proposal was unexpected but instantly compelling to both women. Linda would have the opportunity to rebuild her relationship with Emma gradually while continuing to strengthen her recovery. Sarah would remain connected to Emma while supporting Linda's journey toward full reunification. Most importantly, Emma would maintain stability while developing bonds with both her birth mother and the woman who had become her second parent. When Judge Reynolds issued her formal ruling later that afternoon, it outlined this graduated approach. Continued primary physical custody with Sarah for 6 months, with Linda granted progressively longer visitation periods as she met specific benchmarks. Joint legal decision-making for non-emergency matters, mandatory continued substance abuse treatment for Linda, a court review after 6 months with the presumption that primary custody would transition to Linda if all conditions were met. As they left the courtroom, Linda turned to Sarah with tears in her eyes. "Thank you for not trying to take her from me, for believing I can be the mother she deserves." Sarah touched the younger woman's arm gently. "We both want the same thing. What's best for Emma? Maybe what's best is having both of us in her life." By late summer, the arrangement had evolved into something none of the participants could have predicted, but which worked with surprising harmony. Linda had moved into an apartment 2 floors below Sarah's in the Ridgeview Heights complex. Emma spent days with Linda while Sarah taught summer school, evenings and nights with Sarah, and weekends divided between them. Max moved between apartments with easy familiarity, having appointed himself Emma's permanent guardian, regardless of which home she occupied. The German Shepherd's recovery had been remarkable, though not complete. He walked with a slight limp from nerve damage to his left hind leg, and his once lustrous coat remained patchy where the worst burns had been. But his strength had returned, along with the alert intelligence that had once made him an exceptional search and rescue dog. In fact, Officer Jenkins had approached Sarah about possibly returning Max to modified duty once he was fully recovered, but she had gently declined on Max's behalf. "I think he's earned his retirement," she'd explained. "He has a different job now." That job was primarily Emma-centered. Max supervised her first tottering steps, positioned himself strategically below her when she climbed sofa cushions, and developed an uncanny ability to anticipate when she was about to put something inappropriate in her mouth. He submitted with dignified patience to her clumsy pats and occasional tail pulling, responding only with gentle nudges to redirect her enthusiasm. Linda's transformation had been equally remarkable. Sober, focused, and increasingly confident, she had expanded her church receptionist position to include coordinating their community outreach programs. She attended AA meetings 3 times weekly, had developed a small circle of supportive friends, and had even started taking online courses toward a degree in social work, inspired by her own experience with Carol Walker. For Sarah, the changes were more subtle but no less profound. The paralyzing grief that had defined her existence for 3 years had given way to a life filled with purpose and unexpected joy. She still visited Lily and David's graves weekly, but now she brought fresh flowers and stories about Emma's latest achievements rather than her own tears. She had begun dating again, tentatively. A divorced father of 2 she'd met at a teacher workshop, allowing herself to imagine a future that included love as well as responsibility. On the anniversary of the fire, the 3 unlikely family members gathered in Sarah's apartment for a quiet dinner. Emma, now 15 months old, had recently mastered the phrase "my Max," which she employed enthusiastically whenever the German Shepherd came into view. Tonight she alternated between her mother's and Sarah's laps at the table, distributing sloppy kisses with democratic fairness. After Emma was tucked into bed, with Max assuming his customary position beside her crib, Linda and Sarah sat on the balcony with cups of tea, watching the summer stars emerge above Ridgeview. "I never thanked you properly," Linda said quietly. "Not just for saving Emma, but for saving me, too. For showing me it was possible to start over." "I think we saved each other," Sarah replied. "You and Emma helped me find my way back to life after I'd been just going through the motions for so long." Linda glanced through the sliding glass door to where Max dozed beside Emma's crib. And Max saved us all. The simple truth of this statement hung in the air between them, requiring no elaboration. From the most unlikely beginnings, a neglected dog, a child in danger, a woman trapped in grief, and a mother lost to addiction, had emerged something that resembled, in all the ways that mattered, a family. Later that night, after Linda had returned to her own apartment, Sarah checked on Emma one last time before bed. The toddler slept peacefully, one arm flung above her head, the other resting on Max's neck. The German Shepherd opened one eye at Sarah's approach, his tail thumping once in acknowledgment before settling back to his vigilant rest. "Good boy, Max," Sarah whispered, kneeling to stroke his scarred head. "The very best boy." In the quiet darkness of the nursery, Sarah finally allowed herself to acknowledge the full circle of their journey. The man who had taken her family from her had, through the most convoluted path imaginable, led her to a new family she would never have found otherwise. There was pain in this realization, but also a strange peace, a sense that the universe, having dealt her an unbearable blow, had eventually provided a different but equally precious gift. Emma stirred in her sleep, mumbling something that sounded like "Mama" before settling again. Whether she meant Linda or Sarah didn't matter. She had room in her heart for both, just as Sarah had discovered her own heart was expansive enough to love this child, who had come to her through tragedy and miracle alike. With Max standing guard, Sarah closed the nursery door softly and headed to her own bed, secure in the knowledge that sometimes healing comes in the most unexpected forms, and that love, once you open yourself to it again, finds its own unpredictable but perfect path forward. When life brings us to our knees, sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected places. Mac's journey reminds us that heroism knows no species, that love transcends tragedy, and that second chances are possible even after devastating loss. For Sarah, Emma, and Linda, healing didn't mean forgetting the past. It meant finding the courage to build something new from the ashes of what was lost. As we grow older, we carry our share of heartbreaks and regrets, but Max's story shows us it's never too late to find purpose, to forge connections that heal old wounds, and to create family bonds that defy conventional definitions. His unwavering loyalty reminds us that sometimes when words fail, the purest love is expressed through simple, selfless actions. In our twilight years, we understand better than most that life rarely follows our planned path. Yet in its unexpected turns, even the painful ones, we might discover new journeys worth taking, new hearts worth opening ours to, and new ways to leave this world better than we found it. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.